Hi, everybody. Welcome back to Coach's Corner, where we try to take on the topics that you guys talk about amongst yourselves, but never hear about on podcasts or in conferences. So today's topic is how to have difficult conversations with clients, with candidates, maybe with yourself, with your recruiters. Keep in mind, we're taping this very early for us. So this is already a difficult conversation because none of us have had enough coffee. Basically. So there's a really good chance this will be incoherent, but let's take a shot at this. So, Scott, it was your idea. And ever since a couple weeks ago, you said, let's talk about having difficult conversations. I was like, oh, yeah, that's a good idea, because I know like recruiters hate telling, say, a candidate they didn't get the job. They hate it, which makes perfect sense because recruiters are people pleasers and they love to give good news. They hate to give bad news. And they procrastinate and put it off, and it gets heavier and heavier and heavier. So when you first said that's a topic, I was like, yes, nobody talks about that. Everybody feels it. That's why we do this podcast. So you start us off. What were you thinking when you said that's a good topic?
Well, I'll put it this way. If you want to improve your golf game, work on your putter, because half the shots come from that one club.
Right.
And if we look at a 5-to-1 interview to placement ratio, that means 4 interviews aren't going to go forward. So we're going to have a lot of conversations where we're telling candidates, I'm sorry, they're going to go with somebody else. I've had grown men, partners with big law firms, cry on the phone with me because they didn't get an offer. One of them said, you're kidding me. And I'm like, no, I'm not. And I've learned that this is a very vulnerable point in people's career where maybe we kind of talked them in to taking a look. I'm not going to leave. Wow, that's interesting. Tell me more. Okay, I'll meet with them. And then they're like, wow, I'm so excited. Oh, they're going with somebody else. And then I've also discovered that sometimes a candidate will associate us as a negative person, a negative emotion, and they'll never consider us again. Yeah. So I think the nuance of this conversation, letting people know up front, this may not go anywhere. So I don't want you to get your feelings hurt, or however you say it to them. If this doesn't go anywhere, this is exploratory. And I even think that there's different strategies. This is something we talked about on our Monday group coaching calls the other day, where there's different ways to explain this to people and having different strategies. And one strategy is, and pardon the macabre humor, but your dog died, here's a puppy. My client said no to you, but I've got another client that might even be a better fit. So having...
Yeah.
I apologize for my macabre humor. Yeah, right. I'm highly irreverent in certain things, but having that backup option that you can bring somebody, and then also learning how to nuance that with the clients. And I think, and I'll stop here, but overall, if you do this well, I think this becomes an emotionally charged bonding event between you and a candidate or a client, where you're bringing them difficult news. And I'd even recommend prepare, at the very least, outline it on a yellow sticky note when you have that difficult conversation, so that way you're prepared. And I think even how you communicate it, if you hesitate, listen, Dave, I'm so sorry. Right. If you sound like you're hesitating, they're going to be like, oh man, this guy's not a professional. So those are some of my overall.
Yeah. And we're agreed, aren't we, as a group? Mike, you can tell me if you're feeling the same way. We're agreed that at least the candidate deserves to hear it. In other words, 15 years ago, if I was in a dating relationship with somebody and I decided to break it off, there were rules. Like, okay, you could break it off in text if you had 3 dates and there was never anything physical. If it's 6 months and you've been sleeping with each other, a text is not going to work. Like, you got to sit down with this person and explain that they are, in my case, dodging a bullet. But now, just a few years later, it is acceptable to people text that you're about to get served with divorce papers, right? So I have junior recruiters, and I wonder, Scott plays at high levels, right? $170,000 fees. I have recruiters who are 25 to 30 years old who, when I say, what did the candidate say when you told them they didn't get the job? I didn't tell them. Or I don't know. I texted them and I didn't hear back. And I'm like, you texted them. I mean, they're used to being ghosted. They're used to ghosting, and they're like, I don't have good news. Why would I want to create confrontation in my day? He'll figure it out sooner or later. Bye. Are we agreed that they deserve to hear the news, Mike?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I coach, this came up on a group call recently, but even with my own firm. So I am a recovering people pleaser too, Danny. And especially when I started in recruiting, I didn't even know I was a people pleaser. It was just how we operate, right? You were young when you started in this. I was 25. And the way I figured out because I always felt from a standpoint of dignity, honor, never mind my reputation in the profession, but just do unto others, right? How would I want to be treated in this situation? As hard as it is, right, for us to tell somebody, especially we're talking like Scott with that at that offer stage, not you got bumped after the first interview. Our policy was you had to tell them on the phone, right? So the way I did it, though, my loophole was if I heard that you weren't getting the offer, Danny, I'd call probably at a time where I knew I was going to get your voicemail. And I'd say, hey, Danny, yeah, it's Mike Gianto over at Hudson Consulting. I've got an update for you. So I want you to call me back and the reason I did that was two. One, of course, there's probably a little bit of cowardice in it, number one. Number two is it let them set up to grieve a little bit.
Yeah.
And it starts thus. So they'd always call back and nobody was ever upset with me. The return call was always like, Mike, I got your message. It doesn't sound like good news. Because I never wanted to deliver that the whole thing in a voicemail, but I kind of wanted to set the expectation so that they're not calling back with, oh my God, what's the offer? And then I could have an educated conversation as to whatever degree I wanted to on why they didn't get the offer, or just hear them out. Almost like, Scott talked about, sometimes you just want to vent. I can't believe it. My God, they told me I was the guy, all the stuff, and just give them line and let them go. And I know, I understand. it's not my call. Right.
Right. So, and I'm glad you used the word grieve, because I do think that's the right word, because the whole idea behind, okay, I want to go to the wake and see the body, which even as a Catholic, I'm like, can we stop this? This is horrific, right? Like, why do I have to see this body, with all of this, stuff? It's like, a Catholic wake is the only time you see a body with fillers that they only get once, right? This is the only one-stop shopping for fillers is when you see a body. But psychologists would say, no, that's necessary to have closure. I'm like, and when I first heard that, I was like, well, no, I know they're dead. Like, I know I'll never see them again. But there is something to the closure of it, and it heals faster, the grieving process faster. So I think that's the right word. But you bring up a really good point, which is, how much do we tell them? We owe them to say, you're not getting the job. Sorry, it went to someone else. But the question I get from so many recruiters is, can I tell them they thought you talked too much? Can I tell them they think you're too old, you don't have enough juice left in the tank? Can I tell them that, your reference said that you really aren't a very good manager? There is this talk about people pleasers. The recruiters who are bonded to these candidates more than they are to clients, really, they feel like I'm helping this candidate by saying, hey, just so you know, they decided that you didn't present well physically, or you talked too much, or they thought your clothes were something out of the 90s. And you think you're helping them. And at the same time, putting aside certain legal liabilities if you said too much, I've always been on the other side of, no, this is not a counseling session. That's not what I do. I owe it to you to know that this process is over. So if you have another offer, you should take it. You need to know, since I got you into this, as Scott says, that it's over. But I've never felt the need when they say, well, what happened? I always set expectations in the beginning. They're using a search firm. They pay me. That means they get a short list of elite candidates. You're usually 5. You're one of 5. So you have a 20% chance of getting this job. If you want it, I will position you as well as possible. And if you interview well, you might blow the other four out of the water. But most of the time, when someone calls and says, hey, we're not going to hire Mike, we're hiring X, they decided X was better for whatever reason. Who knows? Less money, more money, has a buddy who knows a buddy. Who knows? Hit a home run in the interview. Who knows? Who knows? We'll never know. Let's move on. That's always the approach I've taken, because when I was young and I would say, well, you know, you used a lot of Seinfeld references, wink, wink, right? Letting them know that they're too old. Okay, boy, did that backfire on me a few times, right? And it doesn't help. I don't see where it helps, you know?
So that absolutely. If it was, I didn't like how they dressed. They talk too much. Those are, especially talk too much. That's who they are. Yeah. And there's gonna be somebody that hires them because they bonded chemistry wise, because the way they talk, right? So, but if there was something, if it was technical, and I was trying to frame it, Danny, as almost to the point of, I presented, there was 3 outstanding people that went to this round, right? You know, so it's, you know, they had it 1A, 1B, 1C going in. And, you know, so now they're shaving degrees of excellence based on what they wanted. So you did nothing wrong. You know, somebody set got a world record and a gold medal on the 100-yard dash, and you were right behind him in the tape. So there's no fault. There's no like, oh my God, you did horrible. It's their distinctions based on their needs and that other person's strengths compared to yours. And it wasn't easy. And that's how I stay out of the you're bad, you're wrong.
Right.
Even Scott, if it wasn't 100% true.
Right. Yeah. I mean, that's one of the hardest things I had to accept in the business. And none of us could be in the business as long as the 3 of us have been if we didn't have integrity. But, you know, there is a distinction to be made, I think, between being completely honest in all things and being absolutely honest, right? If I felt somebody, you know, said something stupid on an interview, let's say just because of where we are in filming this podcast 2 weeks before the election, let's say somebody goes in and starts talking about politics and the hiring authority was turned off by it.
Yeah.
Well, that to me is fixable. That's a mistake you made, fixable, easy. Look, dude, keep your political thoughts to yourself in an interview. You don't know who you're going to get for a client, right? That's fixable. But as you say, if somebody talks too much and they're 41 years old, I tried this for years. I'd be like, Mike, he told me you talk too much. And then Mike would take 20 minutes to tell me that he doesn't really talk too much, right? So,
Danny, you crack me up.
It's not going to change. Do you agree, think, Scott, that if it's fixable, you say something? If it's not, you let it go?
It depends. And I think a couple of things, I think we live in a world of gray. At the Naval Academy, our first year, they talked about not the honor code, we had an honor concept. And if your grandmother made cookies and they were absolutely awful, and she asked you, did you like them? What do you say? They were wonderful. It's a social untruth. Mm-hmm. And so I think we have to look at what's our intention here. I think we have to look at, are we trying to serve this person? Is this helpful? Yep. Or could this be misconstrued? Right. Could this put us in a position of risk? Because sometimes I'll have clients that say, don't tell the candidate this, but I wouldn't present him anywhere else. Right. The way he treated the staff when he walked in. Anyways, so I think everything is case by case. And that's why I think the more you've seen this movie, the easier it is when you see it again in the future. There's so many things that could spin off of this. Client, perhaps candidate, perhaps debriefs after the interviews. I think that, because I've had some clients that say, we didn't like your candidate. Why is that? Because he furrowed his brow during the interview. Right. That's what they told. Right. And I think people can be stupid and they can make decisions for stupid things, for stupid reasons. I think that coaching the candidates to focus on the major points of the interview, and even coaching them, whether it's over the phone, sending them an email. And I do both of that. Plus I have a 15-point article that I wrote that I'll send to them. These are the things I'd recommend. So I think it all depends, Danny. I think every situation is different. I also think you have to look at what is your goal with this candidate, which is why it's helpful to niche in a certain area, because this client might say no today, but another one might say yes in 2 weeks.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So I also think can you use this negative event to bond with that candidate? And like I said, sometimes people want to discard you forever because now they hear your name, they have an emotional feeling. So I think coaching them, and Mike, that idea that you had about leaving a voicemail that telegraphs what the news is going to be, so it presents it to them without presenting it to them, that's a great idea.
Yeah, softens it up. I think that's a great idea. And let's broaden this discussion a little bit, because Kai, you said, knowing what your goal is. So I thought about this on the drive in this morning. It's like, well, you've got the obvious call that recruiters fear, telling candidates they didn't get the job, but you also have giving bad references to a client, or a lot of the people that listen to this podcast are running search firms, or they're practice managers within a big search firm, and they have to give bad news to a recruiter. They got to fire a recruiter or give them a bad performance review. So there's all kinds of difficult conversations. And Scott, when you said know what your goal is, it made me think of several years ago we had a recruiter who just wasn't doing the little things. It was making placements, but refused to put the stuff in the database in the way they were supposed to, and wasn't following protocol, but was a pretty good salesperson. And her manager hated that. She was just like, she thinks she's a prima donna, blah, blah, blah. And one day she crossed the line and didn't put something in a placement file that gave the impression that she got a bigger split than she was supposed to get. The smoking gun, the manager came in and said to me, I just caught Vicky doing X. And I was like, oh, that's bad. And she said, I'm going to get her in here. I was like, yeah, we should talk to her. And she said, okay, so let's what? And I'm like, okay, this is a good teachable moment for you. What is the goal of this meeting? She was like, well, I want to kick her ass. Like, that's bad what she did. Yeah, I understand. So we'll spend 90 seconds yelling at her. Then what? What is the goal of this meeting? I don't have meetings just to make recruiters feel bad, right? Are we trying to get her to change her behavior and understand that there's a problem here, that doesn't matter how many placements she makes, if she can't put the placement files in correctly, I will fire her? That's okay. But I'm not going to have a rant session where all I do is yell at Vicky and remind her what a bad human she is, right? You have to know the goal of the difficult conversation going in, right? When you're giving a client bad references, what's the goal here? The goal is to give the bad references, but also to try to massage this in a way so that they can get past the bad reference and potentially still hire this person. Or if the reference is horrible, then I'm going to take the hero way out and tell the client, we shouldn't hire this person, and hopefully it comes back to me. But you see, to me, a lot of times people are having difficult conversations, and because they don't know their goal, they just meander and they wander, and no one knows really what this meeting is about.
Yeah. You're right, Danny. Having a clear objective on that.
Especially, I think, when you talk to recruiters, Mike, no?
So when I hired people, because one of the things I realized is we did really well as a company in 1999, 2000. You could fog a mirror in tech back then and do pretty well, right? So, I thought I was wonderful. And 2001 proved how much I had to work on. And one of the things was, when I began rebuilding out of 2001, I had my team come to me and give me an honest assessment of what I was doing wrong, what I could do better. And it was like, Mike, you talk a good game on expectations and accountability, and you know what, there's just no follow through, right? And the ones that had survived would have done it, with rodents leading them. They were just self-motivated, right? They were there. They understood why they were there. So that when I began hiring people, I began saying, there's a formula when you join here. I went through my metrics and I go, people that hit these benchmarks succeed, period. I have 0 failures. Some of them quit. Some of them decided they didn't want to be in the business, but nobody failed hitting these benchmarks. And for me, it was 15 conversations a day. It still is, by the way. And like you, Danny, we have data that proves to recruiters you can talk to 15 people a day. You don't have to as a tenured person, but as a new person. So I went through the whole process of, one of the ways to have difficult conversations is set very clear expectations. So you don't come out of the blue or let something that was a boundary drift. Now all of a sudden you're pissed. Where did this come from? Right. So when I hired them, I said, these are the objectives. You see how firm I am on them. If you do this, you'll make this your first year. You'll make this your second year. if you don't hit those, Mr. Potential New Hire, what do you think I should do? Well, if I were you, I would fire me. Great, because that's really, we're on the same sheet of music. Not the same, because that's what's going to happen. If I know this is successful and less than that's not, there's really no reason for you to be here. So then when they start, and inevitably, no matter how much you did it, reset the expectation. And this follows through with everything for you as a manager or leader, setting expectations and immediate follow through. And they come in a lot of times with 14 or 13. It's like passive aggressive effing with you, right? Is he serious?
Yeah.
And I got their commitment that they would do exactly, specifically, and precisely what I told them to do. That was part of the close of the interview. Then you come in at 14 and I go, that day I go, Danny, my only question to you today is, why did you choose to fail your very first day on the phone here? Well, what do you mean? 14 is pretty good. 14 is not 15. Mm-hmm. I would even say sometimes 14 means as much to me as 0.
Right.
You know, I didn't kick you out of here at 5 o'clock. Like, you couldn't have made 2 more calls. If this happens again, pack up that beautiful picture of your family, your plant, and you're gone, because I just don't have the patience for that. Yeah. And people would say, when people said that, when I've told people that, when I've coached people on that, when I've trained them on setting really specific boundaries and expectations, they imagine this world where I'm firing 4 out of 5 people I hire in the first week. Mm-hmm. I think I fired 5 people in 10 years because of that. Yeah. And I was hiring 7 or 8 a year, right? It works. So one of the ways, if you're going to have a very difficult conversation to what's the goal, is be crystal clear as to why this is the policy. This is the expectation. Danny, can I expect you to follow through on it?
Yeah.
And then whatever the degree of it is, know in advance. And if you can, this is the consequence.
Right. Yeah. And the industry for years, as all 3 of us know, has been awful at delivering consequences. We like recruiters. We hang on to them too long. You know, as you were talking, Mike, and I was thinking about my years of training Art Lucas's people at the Lucas Group. And for people in the audience that don't know, the Lucas Group, I don't think there's any question, was the most successful direct hire contingent firm probably in the history of recruiting. I mean, at one point, there were up to 400 recruiters before, with multiple locations, a lot of them in Atlanta and Dallas, before Art sold. And I think later on, Korn Ferry bought them in a second iteration. But they were a machine. And I would do the training of their new people. And then Art would say, look, you want to learn something about managing? And he would have me sit in on meetings where he would fire recruiters or give grief to somebody, give a bad performance review. And I just would sit in the back and listen. And I still remember he would say to me, most people explain and then deliver the news. I deliver the news and then I explain. So it was, to me, the first couple of times I saw him do it, it was shocking and unsettling, because he would call a woman in and she would sit down. He'd say, Diane, you're fired. And there'd be a pause, and I'm looking down at the ground, and he's like, would you like to know why? And if they said no, the meeting was over. If they said yes, then, as you say, he would back it up with data. You build this, you were supposed to build this, your call level was supposed to be this, it wasn't. I don't put up with mediocrity. I'm sorry. Have a nice life. And by the way, you have a non-compete. So don't try anything funny or I'll sue you. Wow.
And he would.
Right. And he would. Now, So here's the thing. I was just at Pinnacle this past weekend, and there's ex-Lucas people all over the world, because it was a hard place to work because he was tough, right? But to a person, over the years, as he's retired now 10, 12 years, I would run into people and they would say, you talk to Art. And I would say, why, did you work for him? They'd say, yeah. And they would say, oh, he was just so tough, but fair. And they all loved him. There was no like, that guy was so hard, he treated me so fair. So there's something to be said for this sort of disruptive, pure honesty. Like, I told you this was how I was going to do it. That is how I do it. This is on you. It is not on me. Next man up. He's beloved by these people. He's not hated. They're not mad at him for holding him accountable, but he believed in deliver the news first, explain later. And I think that could be true with clients, with candidates, with recruiters.
I think something that ties into that, Danny, which kind of brings it back to recruiters delivering bad news to people, is how you communicate it, the gravitas you need to have when you're talking to people. Where I think, and I've trained people, don't say thank you when a candidate answers the phone. Don't approach the candidate from a subservient position. How are you today? The reason for my call is this. I say the inflection of your voice gives a connotation of strength. Talk to them as an equal, as a peer, maybe down a little bit. I had one candidate, I recruit partners for big law firms, and he's kind of giving me a little bit of attitude. And he's talking a little bit much. And what I do, I bring the phone close to my mouth and I go, I just breathe into it. So he's hearing me verbally sigh, like, get on with it. And then he stops talking.
Yeah.
And I said, Gary, I need you to listen to me. Don't let your ego steal your future. You need to hear this opportunity. Oh, yes, sir. And it changed everything. And I think that people need to, recruiters, as we're talking to clients and candidates, we need to have this gravitas. I'm the authority. I'm the one that can solve your problem. I'm extremely busy right now, but I'm happy to consider working for your firm. If you tell me about that, then I'll make a decision if I can take it on within one of my portfolio of clients. Having that type of gravitas when you talk to people. And so I think you earn their respect instead of somebody that's going to walk all over you. And I think that ties into how you set the bad news stage. And when, kind of talk about what we talked about before, setting the expectations. And something I'll even tell every candidate, this is where we go from here. This is my process. I'm going to present you to my client. There's going to be a series of offers. And if they like you and you like them, there could be an offer. And I get involved in the whole thing. And this may not go anywhere. So if it doesn't, I just don't want you to think that you have to avoid me in the future. I had a candidate just recently, a whale. And my client was all hot and bothered, getting the next rounds, and he disappears for 10 days. I called him yesterday. Oh, sorry, Scott. I'm so sorry. And I let him know, hey, that's okay. Just to let you know, you're my client's top priority globally right now. And if you don't want to go forward, that's okay. Just tell me that. Some people think they've got to disappear and never call me. They're going to hurt my feelings. I don't want to do anything unless it's in your best interest. All I ask is that you're transparent with me. Does that make sense? Close it. Does that make sense? Sure. Are you okay working that way? Sure. Setting expectations with the client and a candidate in terms of how you go forward.
Scott, I love the idea of not just being equals, but maybe even talk down a little bit. I love that. I think that would be great for recruiters. We keep talking about delivering bad news, but part of delivering bad news is coming across in a way where you can accept bad news. I do a lot of postmortems where I call candidates who turn down offers. And the number one thing they tell me is not that they didn't believe us or about the counteroffer information, but I say, why did you ghost us? Why didn't you tell my guy that you were taking the counteroffer? And the number one thing is, he came across like he was desperate, needed the deal, and I just couldn't bring myself to give him the bad news. Oh, that can't be good. You've got to come across like, I would love to get this deal, but I don't need the deal. This deal is not how I'm going to eat this month. Just tell me, right? I think we have to be better, not just at delivering bad news, but hearing bad news, for sure.
Exactly.
So I think the last thing I want to make clear to the people that are listening, and I say this because on the plane on the way home, I read this book called The Anxiety Generation, which is how the Gen Z people are so anxious, like anxiety is pervasive, and it made me anxious reading the book, right? And I just felt so bad for these people. But the data that I always hear is that 70% of the things you worry about never happen. And I'm such a worrier that I worry that number is low, right? But the point is don't sit on this bad news that you got to deliver all day. It just gets bigger. It just gets heavier. You can't sleep tonight. You put it off. You duck somebody. Now you feel guilty because you ducked them, and they're wondering why they didn't get the job. And the number one thing candidates tell us is, I don't like recruiters because when they need you, they're all over you. And when they don't need you, you can't get them on the phone. Don't be that person. Don't be that person. Give the bad news, 8:00 in the morning, get it over with, and the rest of your day will just get better. Just don't avoid it. Right?
Yeah, if I talk to you like in this moment, Danny, and you said we're not going to hire candidate A, right? I'd sit there, I'd breathe into it. I'd probably leave a voicemail within 5 minutes. Take that energy and just shift it all the way. I don't need to, I don't want to carry that. I gotta, and then just leaving that voicemail the way I talked about, that put the energy out.
Yeah.
And I know intellectually and emotionally that the candidate's going to receive that message, that I'm not actually going to be the one to deliver the full blunt of the message. I've already delivered 70% of it. And again, I was never called out on it. People might go, oh, Mike, that's you can do it however you want. It's your life. But I probably did that for over 20 years. I don't know how I figured it out, but to a point, hey, Mike, they were always appreciative, because some people send that in email. In the later part of my career, then like to your point, Danny, earlier, text. No, this is a great candidate. He or she may be a hiring manager in the future or a great candidate for me in the future. And again, it's that do unto others. How would I want to be told? I'm okay with getting that wishy-washy voicemail to set me up, because I might just sit there. To your point, like Scott, you said it, we've all had people like break down because this was their dream job. And even with that message, they'd still break down, but it just softens the process.
Eases it a little bit. Yeah, no question. Yeah, no, I think that's very humane. Well, it's never a difficult conversation to talk to you guys. I always appreciate your time. Let's do it again soon. Have a great day.
Thanks, Danny. Thanks, Mike.
Thank you,
See you, everybody.
Danny, thanks, Scott. Great conversation.
Thank you.